An example of a submaximal intensity and high duration activity is a marathon. The aerobic system is the dominant system in this event. The aerobic system takes a while to kick in, so at the start of the marathon the other systems would be used. It takes the aerobic system a while to get going because it involves a series of very complex reactions which take a while to break down ATP and make energy. However, once the system gets going, it can resynthesize ATP for very long durations of time but at a low intensity. The fuel which the aerobic system breaks down is carbohydrates such as glucose and glycogen. These carbohydrates are broken down in the process of glycolysis, Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. The fibers which are recruited by the aerobic system for a marathon are slow oxidative fibers. These fibers would be recruited because out of all the fibers, they are the most resistant to fatigue. This is because they have a lot of capillaries and contain high numbers of myoglobin and mitochondria. These fibers contain more oxygen than the other muscle fibers, which mean they are much more resistant to fatigue. Also, slow oxidative fibers contain high amounts of triglyceride stores. Triglyceride is a stored form of fat. The body uses the energy in the food we've eaten to help fuel the body. The triglyceride store affects the speed of contraction because a high store of it would mean the muscle contraction would be slower. Slow fibers have high amounts of triglyceride, so the contractions are slower. If the contractions are slower, this means that the intensity is therefore lower, as not much speed and power is being produced. A marathon has a long duration but a low submaximal intensity. The marathon is a continuous event, and the level of fitness for the individual competing in this would need to be high as it's such a long event. It requires good stamina and fitness. From using the aerobic system, the main waste products which are produced include water, heat and carbon dioxide. These waste products, however, aren't really very harmful and can be cleared very easily from the body. Carbon dioxide is removed from the body in 3 different ways, which I'll talk about later. Heat is gotten rid of from the body by the process of evaporation. The vessels vasodilate, so get larger or expand, to allow a large volume of blood carrying the heat to be taken to the skin where it's evaporated or leaves the body through sweating. Water is removed from the body through sweating, urinating and when we breathe out. The RER stands for the respiratory exchange ratio. Exercise, which is a low intensity and has a long duration, relies on fats and carbohydrates, mainly as the source of fuel, but protein is used if it's really needed. Fats offer a concentrated supply of fuel, and carbohydrates provide the most efficient source of fuel. Protein is mainly used in the later stages of exercise, which is carried out for long durations. When the body has run out of carbohydrates, the body is then dependent on protein to supply the energy that is needed. Amino acids are broken down to make energy for the body. When using the aerobic system at a low intensity and high duration, glycogen stores deplete. The glycogen stores depleting is one of the main causes of fatigue, as I explained earlier on in the video. A marathon runner will use glycogen at a much slower rate than a 100-meter sprinter would use it. The depletion of glycogen stores mean that the muscles are unable to maintain contraction as the body can't use fats as its only source of fuel. Fats can only be used in the combination with glycogen. During submaximal intensity and high duration, the restoration of muscle glycogen stores can take many days. A high carbohydrate diet can speed up the glycogen store recovery process. The restoration of glycogen is vital for athletes as they want the store to be restored as soon as possible post-exercise. Hypertonic drinks contain large amounts of carbohydrates. These drinks are usually consumed after exercise to increase the depleted glycogen stores. When using the aerobic system at a submaximal intensity and high duration, fat stores are required. Triglyceride is a stored form of fat found in fat cells. They are continually circulating in the blood, ready to be metabolized to provide a source of energy. The body uses the energy in the foods we've eaten to help fuel the body. Fats offer a concentrated supply of fuel. Fats are very rich in energy and contain over double the amount of energy that carbohydrates or proteins contain. An excess amount of triglycerides in the body leads to them being stored in the liver or in fat cells to supply the body with energy when it's required. Also, when glycogen stores are full, the liver cells can send any extra glucose to be turned into triglycerides to be stored in the fat cells. Water is consumed from food and drinks and is made as a waste product from using the aerobic system for a long duration. The more the aerobic system is used, the more water that is made as a byproduct. Some water is made from the electron transport chain, as shown here. At the end of the electron transport chain, oxygen combines with hydrogen and electrons to form water. Water is then removed from the body by sweating, urinating, and when we breathe out. Water molecules enter the bloodstream, and then the water stays in the blood and increases the blood volume. And then carbon dioxide is produced in the muscle cells. The more the muscles work, the more carbon dioxide that is made. During exercise, the risen levels of carbon dioxide increase the level of blood acidity. Carbon dioxide is transported around the body in 3 ways. These include being dissolved in the plasma, being converted into carbonic acid, and as carbohemoglobin. Carbonic acid is formed when carbon dioxide combines with water in the red blood cell. Carbohemoglobin is when hemoglobin carries 4 pairs of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide binds to the ion in the heme. And then finally, carbon dioxide is dissolved directly into the plasma and transported around the body. These are all ways in which carbon dioxide is transported to the lungs. Once the carbon dioxide has been transported in the blood to the lungs, it passes into the alveoli through the process of gas exchange. The carbon dioxide is then expelled and therefore removed from the body. In low intensity and high duration exercise, loads of carbon dioxide will be being produced, as the muscles will be working for very long durations. Neuromuscular fatigue leads to the muscles being unable to contract or function properly due to the signals from the central nervous system that should stimulate muscles are unable to send signals to the muscles. Exercise, which has a very long duration and low intensity, can cause problems with calcium release. This is a problem as calcium is needed for muscular contraction, meaning that if there's no calcium ions released, the muscles can't contract. The calcium ions pump at the sarcoplasmic reticulum to restore the ions, but these ions can leak and lose calcium ions. The ions leak from the channels into the tired muscles. The decrease in the amount of calcium ions being released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum reduces or weakens the muscle contraction. It reduces or weakens the muscle contraction as calcium plays a role in sliding filament theory. Calcium ions bind with troponin, and this exposes the sites at which actin and myosin could grab on to and then create the pulling action and therefore a muscular contraction. If there is a reduced number of calcium ions, less cross bridges can be formed, meaning that less or weaker contractions are carried out. Nerve impulses are also affected by long durations as well. They can be affected when there is a loss of potassium ions. Potassium ions impact on the excitability of the SFT in long duration activities. The nerve impulses are slower or reduced. The slower nerve impulses mean that less muscle contractions will happen, and so the muscle contractions will be weaker. The more impulses that are sent, the more muscle contractions that occur. So if there are less nerve impulses sent, then there will be less or weaker muscle contractions. Cholinesterase is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. During a low intensity and high duration, there can either be the depletion or too much cholinesterase. After it's broken down the acetylcholine, it then gets ready to prepare the acetylcholine to then be used again. Each time the acetylcholine is used, a muscle contraction occurs. So for the next muscle contraction to occur, the synaptic cleft has to be cleared of acetylcholine by cholinesterase. If there's too much acetylcholine or not enough cholinesterase, then fatigue occurs due to not being able to make a new action potential. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that is released to stimulate skeletal muscles. At the neuromuscular junction, acetylcholine is needed to transfer the impulse across the synaptic gap. And once the impulse has diffused across the gap, a muscle contraction can occur. But if there's an insufficient amount of acetylcholine, or there's acetylcholine depletion that arrives at the receptor site, muscle contraction cannot proceed and fatigue occurs. At a low intensity and high duration exercise, the availability of acetylcholine can be decreased. This can prevent the impulse getting to the muscle to enable muscle contraction. The effect of many different factors, such as waste products, energy source depletion, and neuromuscular causes, all have an effect on performance. Overall, these factors all make the performance worsen during a submaximal and long-duration activity, as they make fatigue occur more quickly. Although the waste products made by the aerobic system aren't harmful, the build-up of them can make fatigue occur quickly, as if they're not removed from the body. The build-up of them can worsen performance. The longer the duration of the activity, the more waste products that build up, and the harder it is for the body to remove them. The energy sources are vital in providing the body with energy, especially for long duration events, which rely on glycogen and fat stores. The depletion of these stores can result in them being quite problematic, as the body needs as much energy as possible to sustain them. And then finally, neuromuscular can cause fatigue, as there are less and weaker muscle contractions, which can mean the intensity has to become lower, as less muscle contractions mean the athlete won't be able to go as fast. Fatigue can be reduced by a strategy called glycogen loading, also known as carb loading. Glycogen loading is mainly used by athletes who compete in submaximal and long-duration activities. The main point of this carb loading is to increase the glycogen store in the muscles and liver. Glycogen loading is mainly effective and typically used in longer events, lasting a bit longer than 90 minutes, such as a marathon. The strategy not only helps during the event to reduce fatigue, but also after the event to help with the glycogen recovery process. The process of carb loading occurs days before the event. 6 to 4 days before the event, the athlete needs to deplete carbohydrate stores for 3 days in a row. Then, 3 to 4 days prior to the event, the athlete needs to consume lots and lots of carbohydrates and reduce training for 3 days in a row. So this therefore means that at the end of day 3, 4 days before the event, the body will assume that there's a problem with the glycogen store, and so then it will store more glycogen than normal, so the body will end up with a bigger glycogen store, which is what they want. The VO2 max test is an example of when the aerobic energy system would be used, as it's a submaximal exercise and has a high duration. The VO2 max is the volume of oxygen uptake. It means the amount of oxygen taken up and used by the body. The VO2 max test can be used to measure cardiovascular fitness and stamina, as the test is completed over a long period of time. To complete the VO2 max test, it does require fitness and stamina, meaning that the individual does need to be reasonably fit, as it is a very long duration. The VO2 max test usually lasts anywhere between about 5 minutes to many hours. The recovery after a VO2 max test is usually around half a day, but for an extremely long VO2 max it can be for a day or longer. It all depends on how hard someone's worked, the intensity and the duration of the test. The oxygen deficit for the aerobic system would be quite low. This is because enough oxygen is being taken in and is meeting the body's oxygen demands, because they're working aerobically. The oxygen deficit is the amount of oxygen the body couldn't take on board and use, but in submaximal exercise, the body is getting enough oxygen, so therefore has a low oxygen deficit. Also, because the oxygen deficit is the oxygen that couldn't be taken on board by the body when the body was working anaerobically, it would be part it would be low for aerobic exercise, as the aerobic system is dominant, and the only part of exercise which is anaerobic is the beginning couple of minutes where the other systems are used while the aerobic system is just getting ready. The oxygen depth for the aerobic system is also very low. This is because the body is working with oxygen, so therefore the only part of exercise when the body is working anaerobically would again be right at the start when the ATP and PC system would be briefly used. This is because the oxygen depth is temporary shortage of oxygen during exercise. The oxygen depth will occur when the body has worked anaerobically. So therefore exercise that is a low intensity and high duration will have a very small oxygen depth. Metabolic demands include the fact that after using the aerobic system, the heart muscle needs oxygen to sustain an elevated heart rate and stroke volume. Also that the respiratory muscles need extra oxygen for an elevated breathing rate and tidal volume. And finally, that the extra VO2 that is consumed after exercise in the recovery stage by the organs, for example the muscles, the extra oxygen consumed in recovery is needed to replace the oxygen needed but couldn't be taken on board, to remove any carbon dioxide, to keep the breathing rate and heart rate elevated, to regulate body temperature, and for oxygen to go to the muscles and such as the heart. The recovery time after using the aerobic system for submaximal intensity exercise and for high duration is roughly around 3 to 4 days. The restoration of muscle glycogen store after a long duration activity usually takes around 1 to 2 days. After completing an event like a marathon, the best thing to do the day after is to go for a light walk or a swim and not to rest, which is the typical thing people think is best. From using the aerobic system, the alactic and lactacid recovery occurs. The alactic stage occurs at the start of the recovery process as soon as the exercise is stopped. Full recovery by the alactic stage is completed within about 2 to 3 minutes and uses around 4 litres of oxygen. It resaturates the myoglobin with oxygen, resynthesizes ATP and restores the PC store. The ATP to PC system was only used for a short amount of time in a marathon. It's used right at the start of the exercise when the aerobic system is just preparing to be used. The lactacid stage takes around 1 to 2 hours to recover, depending on the exercise intensity. It takes a lot longer than the alactic acid, the lactic acid stage does. So the lactacid stage takes about 1 to 2 hours to recover depending on the exercise intensity and duration and uses about 5 to 10 litres of oxygen. For a long duration activity, it would take longer, so around 2 hours, for the lactacid stage to complete its job, as the muscles would have been working for such long periods of time, so would need a very long recovery. It is responsible for removing lactic acid, replenishing the muscle glycogen stores and rebalancing the body temperature. It removes lactic acid from the muscles, which is accumulated when the body worked anaerobically using the lactic acid system. The lactic acid system was only used for a small part, however some lactic acid did accumulate and needs to be removed. The removal of lactic acid takes around an hour. The lactic acid is removed from the body. The body temperature needs to remain elevated to allow a gradual decrease in temperature. The body doesn't like sudden decrease in temperature. The oxygen consumed at this stage is mainly for helping with the removal of lactic acid by sending oxygen to the muscles. Some strategies for aiding recovery time after a low intensity and high duration include having an ice bath and wearing ice vests. These are both types of cryotherapy. These strategies help decrease the temperature of the body because when an athlete trains or competes in an event, the more the muscles work and the more heat that is produced. The body doesn't like heat, and the more the temperature elevates, the longer the recovery period will be, as it will take a longer amount of time for the body temperature to be brought back down to normal levels. Getting in an ice bath immediately after exercise is an effective strategy for aiding in recovery, as it speeds up recovery and reduces the body temperature, blood flow, and inflammation in tissues of the muscles. It is also effective at flushing out waste products which have built up, which makes the recovery time shorter as the transport of waste products is sped up. The removal and transport of waste products away is sped up. Wearing ice vests is another effective strategy. This is because they cool down the body before performance, before the activity is occurred. The ice vests are shown to keep the body temperatures down and also improve the performance of marathon runners. It's said that athletes can work for longer under the influence of cooling ice vests. Ice vests speed up recovery, as if the body temperature doesn't go as high, this makes it a shorter amount of time for the body to reduce the temperature. That is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed.